Hello, my name is Simon Appleyard, Regional Manager for Wesleyan Financial Services.
Hello, I'm Leyfield, Account Manager, also for Wesleyan Financial Services.
Welcome to today's discussion on the key aspects of GP partnership agreements and how they impact on personal and business financial planning.
So Simon, obviously the partnership makeup of GP practice is constantly changing as people retire or move on and new partners come in. Partnership agreement forms a really important part of the due diligence for a new partner. What are your experiences in that area?
I think the key thing to remember is that where you're a new partner in particular, the due diligence is incredibly important. And that can start with the simple things like, before signing a partnership agreement, check that the names at the top are still the doctors that work there, because too often we've seen that where people sign an agreement where it's still those from the 1980s when it was first set up, and you've got to ask the question, is that still fit for purpose? The key thing is that, as you often say, is that you've got someone who is either coming, and it still happens, directly from employer in the NHS, so they've had an employment contract there, or they've been a salaried GP, again, with a contract of employment, or potentially they've been self-employed or even a limited company as a locum, and they're coming into a different environment with a different set of laws around that. They lose a lot of the protections that you get with being an employed individual, as for instance. So understanding what you're walking into is crucial, because there's a multitude of sins held within those pages of that document, and it's simple things like, what's your holiday entitlement? What's happening as far as what happens if you're off sick? What if you fancy having sabbaticals? What happens if all your partner colleagues decide they want to retire? There's lots of things in there that you need to consider in relation to what does it mean for your personal financial planning requirements, because fundamentally it is your contract of employment, and the profits of that particular business that you are now a business owner of, that's your income. And the impact of all the different workings of that business directly have an impact on you and your family. I mean, you must have seen lots of different instances across your time of the sorts of things that can pop out of a partnership agreement and bite people.
I think you touched on one there, and I'd use that as a really good example of something which is often overlooked. I'll give you two examples. The first thing to say is not always immediately obvious or considered by somebody coming into partnership for the first time, that they're moving away from that employment world potentially where you've got all the protections of being an employee to being a partner. And I'll give you a for instance around that. Maternity pay, maternity leave. Mm-hmm. As a salaried GP, you are entitled to maternity leave as an employee, as every employee in any role is entitled to. When you become the business owner and a partner, your maternity leave entitlements are dictated by the wording of the partnership agreement. You are no longer an employee, you're a business owner. And therefore, if you were somebody where that's a consideration, do your due diligence, see what the terms are. What do I have to pay if I go on maternity leave? It's not uncommon that the partnership agreement says that after a certain number of weeks maternity leave, any additional costs over and above those that can be recovered from the NHS will be the liability of the absent partner. Well, that might mean that you need to do some serious financial planning ahead of maternity leave. So again, it's just an example of how things can be different as a partner. The other area is a different end of the spectrum, retirement. You touched on it there. If you are a new partner, mid-30s, coming into a practice, you may be thinking, well, the wording on the partnership agreement around the rules around retirement are not really that relevant to me. Retirement's 30 odd years away or whatever it might be. But actually think about it from the other way. You might be going into a practice with a high proportion of partners who are approaching or at retirement age, it's going to have a huge impact on you to understand what the mechanism of those partners actually retiring might be. A genuine example, a practice where we had 8 partners, I believe, 2 of which were in their 30s and 40s. The other 6 were all above 55. All of them resigned within a 6-month period. The older doctors chose to take retirement as they were entitled to do, because the partnership agreement had no restrictions on the number of people that can retire at a certain time. Equally, another example, had a husband and wife looking to retire, both doctors, both partners in the same practice, both hitting retirement age at a similar time, but the partnership agreement, as most do, said that only one partner can retire needs to give 6-month notice, and only one partner can retire, give notice within a 12-month period. So one of them had to retire in 1 year, and the other, I believe, had to work 12 or 18 months further on before they were able to retire.
I bet that was an interesting conversation at the breakfast table.
I'm sure it was. But again, we've talked about in other parts of this discussion about the flexibility of a partnership agreement. Right, that was set out in the agreement, and that's how they had to do it, because the practice couldn't afford to lose them both at the same time. But if they'd started planning that 4 or 5 years before and started bringing some continuity planning in, maybe bringing on the new apartment, they might have had more flexibility. The partnership agreement gives you those set rules that say this is how we have to do it if we've got no other option, but it doesn't prevent you looking at different ways of doing it with some planning ahead. So again, that due diligence of understanding how it affects you and your personal circumstances, whatever age you are, is hugely important and often overlooked by new partners.
I think the other thing that strikes me is even today, where after there's been a big trend for partnerships not to own their building, it is still there. And if you're going to join a partnership, what's your is it going to cost you money to buy in, because you've got to buy someone out of their share of the building because they're retiring? Or equally, actually, the partnership owns the building, but the retiring partner's keeping their share. Well, what are your liabilities for the maintenance of that, or does that?
Yeah.
Who does that rest with? The person keeping the share, or you? So any funding requirements to buy your way in, to buy into the practice, they need to be laid out. And I think it is also worth pointing out that having a good look at the accounts at the same time as you do look at the partnership agreement is incredibly important as part of the due diligence, to get a real sense for not only what your earnings are likely to be, but the general health of the business. And getting expert support as far as that's concerned is just as important.
And that point on the accounts, I can't agree with more. And not just 1 year's accounts. Look at the last 2 or 3 years worth of accounts. Get a trend of where income is going. Because again, as a partner, if you're moving away from that employed world and into the partnership, your income is your share of the profits. What are your liabilities as a partner in that practice? So, for example, we see more and more clinical roles that are not GPs but employed. The nurse practitioners, clinical pharmacists, examples. In many cases, not always, they're employees. They can be partners, of course, but in most cases, they're employees. But actually, can you imagine that the cost of replacing a clinical pharmacist who might work full-time in your practice, or a nurse practitioner who works full-time in your practice, over a 12-month period could be 80, 90, 100,000, could be more than that. So if you're a quarter share owner in the business, and you've got roles there that could reduce the practice profits by 6 figures, that reduces your income by a quarter of that yourself. So again, it's understanding not only the health of the practice now, but what the liabilities you're going into as a partner. It's not that you should be put off by this. It's just doing the right due diligence and planning and asking the right questions to make sure that that practice has got the appropriate contingency plans in place for these.
And I think there's two really good points to draw out of what you said there. Number one is never be shy from saying, no, I'd like this redrawn. We need, if I'm going to sign on the dotted line and I'm going to become a partner in this business, this needs to change. Because if they want you, which they will already said, but to let you have a copy of it, they will negotiate as far as that. And go back to that example of potentially you've got an age difference in the partnership. They might have, because they're potentially at a very different life stage, so financially what it means to them might be different. There might be some clauses within there that suit an older person that don't necessarily suit a younger person. Not least of, say, is maternity and paternity. And of course, if it isn't mentioned, it's the 1890 Act, as we've said before, and we all know the Victorians' attitude towards maternity and paternity. So I think that's number one, is always be, go to negotiate on changing a partnership agreement.
Thank you for watching our video today. Hope you found it interesting. At Wesleyan Financial Services, we're specialist financial advisors to GPs and GP practices. So if you have any questions and would like to find out more about how some of the topics we've talked about might affect you, please visit us at wesleyan.co.uk.